Focus now into a big spotlight then. It was the second day of the Andhra Pradesh Investor Summit. Top minister and industry leaders were in attendance and the state has received promises of investment of over 1 lakh crore rupees. While today it was Andhra Pradesh CM Chandrababu Naidu promising ease of doing business through faster clearances, on Friday it was Mamata Banerjee, West Bengal's chief minister, who pledged to script a new chapter in industry-state relations. Are we seeing a new phase of competitive federalism in India, and what are its implications for long-term economic growth? Today I am now joined by the former Chief Economic Advisor, Dr. Arvind Virmani. Thank you very much, Dr. Virmani, for joining us here on The Big Picture. You know, we heard Mamata Banerjee the other day on Friday making these tall promises. In fact, she went on to the extent to say that the state government will work as an employee of the industry. So, you know, it's hard to digest that this is the same Mamata Banerjee who some years ago had driven one of the big industrial conglomerates out of their state. Is this the big takeaway, sir, as far as competitive federalism is concerned, that today, irrespective of which political party or what ideology you may have, you are unambiguously embracing economic growth and industrialization because you know that is imperative to lift people out of poverty?
So there are two issues here. One is the recognition that economic growth is just not about profits. It's really about the jobs created, the employment created, both not just directly but also indirectly. So the importance of investment in sustainable growth and sustainable high quality job creation is being recognized. That's obviously a good thing all across the country. The more states that adopt it, the better it is for their state and for the country as a whole. The second part of it, of course, is the question you raised about competition of federalism, competitive federalism. Now, of course, there are many dimensions of competition, and most of them are good. And of course, there can be one or two basically related to subsidies and taxes, which can also be negative. So we can go through each of those. We can start with any one you want.
In fact, absolutely. That's right, Dr. Virmani. In fact, you actually preempted my question. Now, while, when it comes to the private sector, of course, competition, at the end of the day, it's the consumers who benefit. But what happens when state governments compete hard with each other? Because there's a lot of literature available of the risk to sort of, having a sort of a race to the bottom, especially when one state tries to outdo the other state by promising more incentives, more subsidies. How big a risk is that, sir? Or do you think, that risk is often overblown?
So you want to start with the negative, fine. Well, we can come back to the positives, but sure, I hope we don't overemphasize the negative part of it. Clearly, tax incentives per se and subsidies, I have seen many studies, cross-country studies, which have shown that they don't give any lasting long-term benefits. In the short term, you may increase on the margin some people coming in, but that is not the way to sustainable growth and job creation. So really, even when we think of taxes, I think the better approach to think of is, can we simplify the tax administration? Because that is a big bugbear or a big fear, whether it's domestic industry or foreign industry, of the harassment which they face at the hands of both the local, not just the central tax authorities, but also the local authorities.
Right.
So
fair enough, sir.
So taking off from there, I mean, even
Go on, sir.
Yeah. So even on taxes, it is much better to simplify the tax system and get a control or a handle on the bureaucracy instead of giving away tax incentives and subsidies to start with. Just having a better bureaucracy, which is not trying to squeeze every ounce of taxes from you later, is a much better way to provide a tax incentives than to give an upfront tax or subsidy. Then, of course, there are many other, virtually everything. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. No, I was saying, Dr. Virmani, I was saying that, then do you think that state governments offer, heightened, tax incentives or more subsidies, because those are the low-hanging fruits? What you're talking about, improving, the overall tax administration is concerned, that would be far more difficult to achieve. So therefore, it's far easier to offer subsidies, offer these big tax breaks, because those are the low-hanging fruits. Those are the easier things to do. And therein where the risks lies.
Well, I don't think they are technically easier. Actually, I will be very blunt about it. They are more difficult because the tax harassment is an extraction of private benefit, what we call corruption. So it's a vested interest. Find it much easier to give away the taxpayers' money, which is the direct and explicit subsidy and incentive, rather than to cut down on the corruption and harassment. So I hope we, at least we observers from outside, should not fall into this trap of saying it's more difficult. It's actually quite easy in a technical sense, but the difficulty, of course, is those from the corruption and vested interests.
Right. Sir, would you say then, therefore, in the last,
but there are many other issues which
years,
we should discuss, land and so on. Yeah.
Right. Yes. So please go ahead, sir, because my question would really would be now, in terms of the fact that, with this new rankings that has come up, clearly, as I said, that, that it seems that now there is no ambiguity, there is near unanimity in terms of economic growth is important. From that perspective, how important or how, sort of, do you feel that this is almost a watershed moment? Because, when you have, politicians like Mamata, Banerjee also coming out and sort of openly embracing industry, you think in that sense, this is a watershed moment that we may not have seen 10 years ago?
Yeah, watershed moment, people call it inflection point. Yes, I think definitely I am somewhat surprised at the timing of Mamata Banerjee's change. I don't know how much that has to do with the fact that Mr. Modi won the general election on a plank of economic growth and development. Maybe that had some influence, but whatever the reason, I agree with you. I think that's a very valid point. I think the fact that states as diverse as West Bengal and Kerala are giving serious thought and attention to these sort of issues of attracting investment. As I said, it's basically the recognition that it's only private investment that creates productive, sustainable and growth, and also the high quality job growth which everybody in their state wants. So that recognition, I think, is a key breakthrough. You're absolutely right. So it could be a game changer, yeah.
Right. So, but what about the fact that many would say now also the power equation has changed between industry and the states? Industry today has more bargaining power. I mean, is that a right way of looking at competitive federalism from an industry's perspective?
No. No, actually, I would. That brings me to the point of about land. When there is an industry which requires a lot of land, land is still a problem. So, but there are now countervailing forces. We have a Land Acquisition Act. Historically, if you look at the past 50 years or so, maybe even right up till a few years ago, the industrial estates and industrial land was actually all acquired by governments at government rates and then handed over to industry. Now, of course, this has changed a lot over the last 5 years. And unfortunately, we've gone a little bit to the other extreme. But nevertheless, the point is now there are enough countervailing forces, as for this example I've given you on land acquisition, where that kind of stuff will not be possible. And all the industry is demanding is that to make it easy for us to do the market, that don't put restrictions on acquisition. So the government should get out of the way so that they can actually pay. Many industrialists have said that sometimes they have been willing to pay multiple of the market price to convince people, and that is their job. How they convince it, the government should not come in and interfere and stop them from doing it.
Right. Dr. Virmani, my final question then to you, sir, would be, do you feel that now, today, states have more power to determine its own economic future? In the past, states were a lot more dependent on the center. You know, one argument that the CPM in Bengal has often given is the fact that, you know, that the center had neglected Bengal, and that also played a big role. So today, do you feel, say, in that sense, because the state's share of revenues also have, you know, has gone up as proposed by the 14th Finance Commission? So in that sense, today, states have a lot more power, sir, to sort of determine their own economic future.
Right. There are two reasons. One is the one you mentioned quite rightly, that the automatic devolution has been increased substantially, 10% points. We all recall that, the Finance Commission's award and the acceptance by the government. Clearly, that is one thing which gives them enough flexibility to adjust their own expenditures, etc. And the second one, of course, is that the government, at least much of the formal controls that the government had on industry, the central government has removed. So much of the remaining controls are at the state level. And so the only way, and they have now the power, so if, let's say, just as an illustrative example, if center controlled 90% of the industrial controls, then states had not much leeway. But now the central controls may be down to 10% or less. So 90% is in the hands of the states. And so there's much more room for them to show that they are decontrolling, they are facilitating, they are easing ease of business, and they are simplifying and modifying the labor laws so it's easier to produce and adjust production and investment.
Right. Okay. We'll leave it at that, Dr. Virmani. Always a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you for that conversation. That was Dr. Arvind Virmani in conversation with me over competitive federalism, the sorts that we may not have seen in the past before.